It's all yours, Paula.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Let me share my screen and show some slides. Let's see, are we seeing things now? Is that
Yeah,
working okay? Okay, good. Okay. Um, so thank you so much for having me. Local history is obviously a very broad topic. So I did prepare a few slides, but then hope to have, question, answer, and discussion. And in keeping with your topic, I actually did bring my coffee, so I'm looking forward to coffee and conversation. What I'm going to cover today is a little bit about how I caught the local history bug, some local resources that most of which are available online, so are very accessible for you all. And then just some suggestions, kind of a call to action of how you can make, do, and preserve our local history. So, as they say, you always remember your first. In my case, I'm talking about my first contact, but I realized how much I loved history and loved kind of the connection with history. I grew up in New London, Connecticut, where the playwright Eugene O'Neill, spent his summers. And I'm still remembering going up to the second floor of our library, our New London library, and maybe folks remember card catalogs when you went to the library. I had to do an assignment about the connections that between the play Long Day's Journey into Night, Eugene O'Neill's most famous play, and New London. Where different places and sounds and people that he kind of incorporated into his play, and just being upstairs in that library and just like this like aha moment. Coming back and telling my grandfather about it, and he actually knew some of the places from when he was a boy. And I was just kind of hooked with the idea that, kind of history is around us and I could be part of it. I got to flash forward many years to the 2000s. I moved to Alexandria in the mid 80s, did lots of other things, but I came back to local history when I began to volunteer for the Office of Historic Alexandria. So I did some oral histories of community members. Then I went further back to Alexandria's role in the Civil War, and which is also, of course, Arlington's role as Alexandria County. And one of my projects was to transcribe the diaries of a woman named Julia Wilbur. That's kind of her cache of diaries that are the originals are at Haverford College in Pennsylvania. And kind of really digging into how she described Alexandria through her eyes during the Civil War. As you can see, that project led to a book that I wrote and published in 2017 called The Civil Life in an Uncivil Time. And I'm now working on a book about Alexandria, so it's kind of the place of Alexandria during the Civil War and Reconstruction. So maybe in a couple of years you'll ask me back and I'll talk about the book. But I just want to sort of kind of remind everybody of kind of the scholarly context for local history. This came from the University of Toronto History Department website. Local history contains a wealth of details and stories that help reveal how societal changes impacted the lives of ordinary people. It can be seen as a microcosm or representation of large patterns on a small scale. Locations and objects, sometimes things as mundane as names of streets, and I know we have tons of those, both good and bad in our area, reflect the long heritage of past generations where you live. Local history helps you realize the grand scheme of historical change is made up of countless individuals like you and those around you who contributed to the ongoing story of your community. So I hope that kind of fires you up and gets you ready to go, that, that we all have a role in this. So I wanted to just kind of run through a few resources that are available to us. And this is honestly just, taking, there's so many more, many of which you probably already know, some of which might be new to you, or resources there that are new to you. The first, of course, is the Arlington Historical Society. By the way, I can make these slides available later if you want the URLs. But anyway, there's free monthly lectures, most of which are available both on Zoom and in person. They have videos of past lectures. There's lots of publications. The Center for Local History at the Arlington Public Library has a community archives that are both, a place to look and also to contribute. When I was there in January, the one of the staff members was on the phone with somebody helping them do a house history, of their own house. So the other thing to point out is that they are knowledgeable and very, open staff to help you. There's the Black Heritage Museum of Arlington, which is on Columbia Pike, which has, website and neighborhood histories. Again, if you have ideas at the, please chime in either for, at any level, either now or later. But then I was going to go on to some state things. And obviously for us, a lot of that stuff is housed in Richmond. The Library of Virginia has both kind of a physical building with, lots and lots of archives, but now tons of stuff is digital. And you can get a free library card online that gets you access to the digital stuff. If you want to use the actual building, you need a physical card, but of course you'd be going there anyway, so you can pick up the physical card. Just as a sample, I mean, I just put in Arlington County that's a screenshot from the, the kind of search on the Library of Virginia site, and you'll see that there's all sorts of, things to look at. They also have subject guides. They have online newspapers, old newspapers of all Virginia papers, including many of those that were published in our area. The Virginia Museum of History and Culture has exhibits, has archives, lots of kind of manuscript letters, some of which are online, as well as photographs. So that kind of gives us kind of a state view. And then, of course, we're so fortunate in our area because we have all these, I put Arlington Historical Society for Library of Congress. Of course, that would be the Library of Congress URL. But one of the things about this monolith that's the Library of Congress is that there are individual centers and divisions within it. And so I would particularly call your attention to the Local History and Genealogy Center, the Prints and Photographs Division, there's maps, there's newspapers, and each of these divisions is staffed by the most knowledgeable, passionate, patient people who are very open to emails and also do a lot of kind of, basic webinars. There's one February 28th, I just happened to notice again on house histories, but, I've sort of listened into a lot of them. Some of you might be familiar with Ancestry.com or FamilySearch.org for genealogy. Ancestry.com is a paid service. FamilySearch.org, which is through the Church of the Latter-day Saints, is free. And so a lot of it is for family history, of course, but you could also kind of put things together for, maybe a larger local history, for example, through census records. And they have lots of how-tos, on how to use their sites. But I kind of wanted to talk about, your local history, because I feel like the folks who are on this call just have so much to offer, and so many memories and artifacts and records that who's interested in this? I mean, kind of take it for granted, but that's really not the case. Thinking about the history of your neighborhood, your family, your workplace, your faith community, your hobby, a civic group that you've been involved in, just maybe what kind of resonates with you, what you think is important to share. I found this photograph of, the Parkington Shopping Center, which some of you may remember when it was still Parkington, became Ballston Mall, it's now Ballston Quarter. And so, back in those days, who cares about this little shopping center? Well, now it is part of history. So, where to start? I mean, it sort of seems like so kind of overwhelming. And it's just a question of like winnowing things down, like figuring out what you really want to know more about, or what you really think is important to share. So your passion, and then finding out what is already collected or known about it. And that could be using, the Arlington resources or the state resources, and then thinking about what you can add to the conversation. So it might be memories that you will be able to write down or share orally. The Arlington County, there is an oral history project in both Arlington and Alexandria. Library of Congress has one for veterans. There's, the Story Corps that maybe some people have heard on NPR that, there's all sorts of kind of renditions of that. Or there's just sharing it with a family member, putting on like the recording on your phone. And even that is like vital. There might be printed materials, particularly that I know that a lot of people are aging at home. So that must mean that you have lots and lots of, you haven't had to do the downsizing to move someplace else. So there might be old records that you have and files and newsletters of organizations, books and that kind of thing that are worth sharing. There might be images, photographs, maps, drawings, or artifacts, kind of everyday housewares, clothing, and that sort of thing. And then the question is, kind of what to do with it. And I am a kind of product oriented person. I don't want to just sort of do it for the heck of it. So there's lots of ways to do it. I mean, from actually writing it down for other people in a book, an article, a newsletter. As I mentioned, the oral history archives at the library. There is a page on the Center for Local History website that's kind of asking for this kind of stuff, wanting this kind of stuff for their files. So you might want to take a look at that and see if you have anything that that would be worth, be valuable for other people. Again, it might be things that like, oh, who cares about this? Well, lots of people are going to care about it. If not now, then 10 years from now, then 50 years from now, and 100 years from now, we kind of forget that, you know, we're looking at stuff from 100 and 200 years ago, and people 100 years from now will be doing the same. Um, there's websites, blogs, and podcasts that are always looking for things. Or it might just be preserving it for your next generation and really not really sharing it beyond that, but it being just super valuable, for the next generation. I was just listening to a podcast this morning of somebody who ended up being a descendant of Benjamin Banneker and making the connection because people started doing genealogy and so who knows, who knows who's going to be connected. And then just kind of a word about the whole value of it. This is from a poet named Eric Overby. He says, no matter where you live, we are all in the membership of the small group of people that we call a county. He actually was writing it for a county newspaper. The difference is not a matter of who's in and who's out. It's a matter of whether you know that you are a continuation of something bigger than yourself. We are all a part of the life and history of the place. And I think that's a way to kind of just be really inclusive about, kind of what history is all about.
We do have some questions in the chat if you have a
Okay.
moment.
Uh-huh.
First of all, somebody says they highly recommend the Virginia Room, City of Fairfax Regional Library.
Yep.
The Arlington Local History Collection, unless it's changed, the hours are sort of infrequent and it's best to make an appointment. Whereas City of Fairfax, you can walk in anytime the library's open and use the collection, and you can make appointments with genealogists. And then the other question, and this is one from me.
Let me just say, just to add,
Yeah.
that's a great idea, and I've used it. And Laura, I guess you were there, so that might even be it behind you. Alexandria also has a local history collection with, it is true. The Arlington hours do seem a bit short, but you could also talk with the folks on like via like a Zoom or phone call.
Mhm.
Yep, sorry.
Okay, and then this is a question from me. My family had all these crazy stories that I knew couldn't be remotely true, but when I started looking at census records and stuff, I found that the weirder and crazier the story was, the more likely that it left behind a paper trail. And I wondered, how do you fact check things that happened, 100 years ago? It's challenge for me anyway.
Right. Well, I mean, sometimes it has to be a caveat, that this is what the sources says, I don't know. I mean, there'll be, sometimes newspapers, particularly like, super local newspapers will kind of have some of the craziest stuff, that, so and so visited today, or, just really, you know, um, there was a fire that a 3-year-old put out, or I mean, just some really kind of crazy fact, and it might just be a couple lines. Um, but sometimes like a local newspaper will be a good corroborating thing. That's also kind of an issue when it's even for famous people who, are like women who, tend not to have kind of the official archives. And so sometimes it's like looking at like an adjacent thing, whether it's something that might have been, they worked for an organization, maybe the organization has something, maybe the government records have something, so sometimes it's a question of like what could be nearby. Sometimes it just can't be known, and all you can say is this is what it says, but we don't really have a way to vouch for it. But, it's still good, and the other thing I would just say too is that writing down what you know now, even not knowing the whole story, who knows as things get more digitized and artificial intelligence in the future, maybe 25 years from now, somebody can, do more of a corroboration.
Okay, and then Nancy asks, I watch a show called Finding Your Roots, and it's surprising how much can be found by professionals in the paper trails from the census, etc.
Yeah, I love that show. I don't know if anyone else has seen it, but the historian, yeah, Henry Louis Gates, um, uh, sort of interviews two celebrities each session, and they kind of go through their family history. And I mean, one thing I will say about that is, they do find amazing things, but they're also kind of cherry picking a little bit. I mean, there might be 40 ancestors, and of course they're going to pick the one that has the most like interesting and wow story. But that's TV. I mean, that's what it's all about. So but yeah, they are able to find things, particularly finding things in like Europe, and it's just pretty incredible.
Okay, and then we have, in celebration of Black History Month, learn more about the Black Heritage Museum of Arlington, BHMA, by watching Aging Matters TV show episode 32, which features Craig Syphax. Is that how you say it? I hope so. President Emeritus of BHMA, and there's a link in the chat.
Oh, great.
So
Yeah.
that's all the comments for now.
Okay. Yeah, I was just going to kind of leave with my website, and then I could put the presentation on, on my website with these different URLs, and hope that, maybe it's encouraged some of you to think of, some kind of aspect of local history that either interests you to learn more about, or that you could contribute to.
And do archives destroy physical copies of documents when they digitize? Because I know people have anxiety about if they give grandma's picture to the Library of Congress, will it eventually just be destroyed?
Um, a professional archives will not do that. I mean, there's a friend of mine is actually an archivist, and we've been sort of trying to develop an archives policy for the Alexandria Historical Society. I'm on the board, and one of the so in this case, for example, our records have I don't know, 25 copies of like a newsletter from like 30 years ago or something like that. Well, not 30 years ago, maybe 30 years ago. So, what's the policy? So there has, when there are multiple copies, at least one physical copy must be preserved. And there are other, there are other policies that are, kind of along those lines. There's also what's called, and I'm not a professional archivist, so I don't, know this that well, but There are also like accession or rights policies, like when you donate something to a collection, you could say that you know, you are okay with it being, let's say a photograph is a good example, and you have a historic photograph of, people, a shop or something like that, you know, you could, you could designate if you do not want the photograph to be used, for example, in publications, or you will allow it to be used in publications, um, or, just any other kind of accession sort of restrictions or non-restrictions that you have.
Okay, and then we have the question, do you feel there is a growing appreciation for preserving local history?
What I do. I think there's kind of a scholarly movement called microhistory, and that's really taking something small to kind of really shed light on something large. And that's definitely sort of a growing field. I mean, the quote unquote academy at one point sort of saw local history as, kind of trivial. But I think, just based on, I do a lot of Civil War and Reconstruction reading, including, in journals and by scholars. And, it might be that some of the bigger topics have already been kind of like, taken. And people are looking for something, an original way to like shed light on something. But I mean, there's definitely just a lot more of, digging into the quote unquote small to show something large. And it's also, just something that's a lot more, approachable for folks. I mean, you might not be comfortable writing a history of, you know, I don't know, the Revolutionary War, I mean, or whatever, but, some little aspect of maybe something in this area, something that George Washington did, it's just something like that. We could sort of find ways to kind of winnow it down and, find something that's manageable for us to study.
One thing I've noticed is that it used to be that family trees were something that were sort of snobbish.
Yes.
Normal, regular people wouldn't talk about their family trees, and now it's become something that people can share.
Yeah.
Let's see. Next question. Have you had the opportunity to interview descendants of some of the people that you write about?
Um, So in my book about Julia Wilbur, she did not have children. She did not have direct descendants, but she did have a let's say a great great nephew who was a professor at Haverford. That's how the journals ended up being there. And then so I mean he left some records, but then in terms of personal interviews, um, there ended up being two descendants of um, much further down. But I mean, they didn't have memories of because of just too many generations in between. But I was able to like get in touch with them, and one in particular did a lot of genealogy and saving of memories. And the woman I wrote about was actually originally from upstate New York, so there was a lot of again local history. It just happened to be in upstate New York, not our area. Of her growing up and being part of abolition and women's rights and the Quaker community and things like that. And so he was able to preserve a lot of that. For this current book, what I've done a little bit of is particularly with African American residents in Alexandria, just trying to learn more of their, kind of from their families.
Okay. Are there partnerships between Arlington museums and those in other areas in the DMV regarding artifacts and other types of resources?
You mean in terms of sharing things or,
Yeah.
yeah. No, I'm not really sure kind of what the policies are. I mean, there definitely is a robust, interlibrary loan. So that would help with more things like, even though a lot more is being digitized, there still is a lot, particularly at the Library of Virginia on microfilm. So you could request, through Arlington to get like interlibrary loan from basically any library. We could also use George Mason Library. So I'm actually auditing a class there this semester, using my senior Virginia resident, be able to take it for free. I don't know if anyone knows about that.
Mm.
But anyway, but one of the great things about it, besides it's a good class, is just having full access to the library, which has been really nice.
That is a wonderful library. And
Yeah.
then Nancy says the free monthly lectures that Marymount University put on by the Arlington Historical Society are excellent.
Yeah. Yeah, and just as you're doing, I mean, they record them, and so you could watch them. You could watch them afterwards. Alexandria also has monthly lectures, and I mean, we are just so lucky with everything that is available to us, honestly. And one, as I'm sure you have discussed, one sort of good side effect of the pandemic was that we started realizing how much could go online. So there's always that too.
And then Cheryl asks, how do you create interest about history among younger people?
That is a great question. Um, and I think part of it is making the connection between the past and the present. So, all the discussions, for example, right now about, um, race and gender and sexuality, you know, have roots in history. And it might be that you have to kind of engage people where they are, right? So they're not going to maybe want to hear the entire, everything that we know that we just think is so fascinating. But there's going to be a piece that's going to be interesting. There might be something about fashion. Okay, what has to do with fashion from the past? Has something to do with food. Okay, you know, things from the past. Health and well-being. What's going on in the past. I mean, everything now with the, even like say with the COVID vaccine, okay, what was happening with vaccines, both, researching them and resisting them from the past. So just being able to kind of sort of do the thread, the conversation is now about how polarized, the country is getting. Just look at some other parts of our history when we were polarized and whether we succeeded or did not succeed. So I think it's just really kind of listening. I mean, and obviously all young people are not going to have the same interest, just like all middle-aged and all older people don't have the same interest. So really kind of figuring out where that person is and then being able to bring things in. I think for classes, the more that they can be involved in, again, in kind of making history and it being kind of a very interactive thing. Um, my husband and I went to a presentation this past Sunday about the Gula Geechee, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, cultures in the Sea Islands. And it sort of started out, Mercer University is a school near there. And so there were people singing some of the music, but then they also had sort of like class projects of students who had gone over to talk with some of the residents and put together little videos. And I mean, that was like a really cool project. And you could tell that each person, had gotten so involved and so learned and really started to appreciate, from this project. And it wasn't, writing a term paper, it was kind of creating a different sort of output. And yet it was a very meaningful output.
I don't know if you're familiar with the book Confederates in the Attic, but Tony Horwitz made the point that a lot of America's kids aren't taught the Civil War. And I wondered, what do you think our area schools are doing a good job in the history classes about teaching history in general?
Well, my kids are kind of long gone from high school, so I don't really know kind of what's happening right now. I did just hear I mean, nationwide, we know that that's an issue, right? Just hearing about, Florida and even some parts of Virginia and how not just the Civil War, but this whole kind of sanitizing of history is like a huge issue. Um, Somebody was just telling me this past week that the Alexandria is going to incorporate, there's been a whole movement about learning more about the lynchings that took place in Alexandria. And again, Arlington was part of Alexandria during that time because it was the late 1890s. It is going to be part of the high school history curriculum. So that's a step in the right direction. But it probably it takes people who are looking at what's in what's in the curriculum, particularly local people, not just people from the outside, but people who are residents of that area and speaking up.
Okay, and can you think of ways that our local schools could do better at teaching history?
Yeah, again, I don't know enough about, what's going on in the schools. I mean, all I could say is again, local history is a great way to do it, right? Is to serve, people maybe, this is off the top of my head, but a project where a group of students researches, a street or a place or whatever, and then starts connecting it to a larger theme. And I know that they're, constrained by testing and AP and all that kind of stuff, the tests, but, as much as they could do that kind of thing would be kind of cool.
Okay, and someone asked if you could give us more detail on those free senior classes.
Yeah, so what I discovered was that you through like George Mason will you can audit a class for free if you're 65 or older and a Virginia resident. And first you have to fill out a form to kind of verify that. And then a class, and then just basically when you look online at the different classes that are offered, and again, I've only looked at history, if they uh, not all classes will do it because I guess they're already to capacity. And so we're kind of like first, I know seniors get to enroll, register. I mean, so there's a little bit of a priority list, but if there's an opening, then you can take a class for free. And I discovered like a George Mason class, even for a Virginia resident, is something like $2,200. So I mean, we're talking about a fair amount of money. And they also waived the fees. So you know, that was a good
Good deal.
discovery for me. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's see. What would be the first step? Would you go to a website in Virginia government, or would you go directly to the George Masons?
Um, let's see, I can't, I could look up I mean, it's been a couple of years since I did it. And one good thing is that, once you kind of go through the hoops, you don't have to do, you don't have to do it a second time because obviously you're not going to get any younger, you're only going to get older. So, I could look, I'll look up what the website was and then I could let you know and,
Okay.
or else people could just look for it or,
Hmm.
but I'm trying to remember, it was called, can't remember what it's called, Virginia Senior Resident, something, I can't remember how you would put
Okay.
together a string of things to, yeah. And I think it's all Virginia public universities. I can't say that for sure, but obviously that's the one that's closest to us.
Okay, and then Nancy says apparently Georgetown University also has a good deal for seniors, either auditing or taking classes at that school, and they have a bus that will pick people up in certain areas of Arlington.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, that's super cool. And
Yeah.
then another question, in addition to your own books, what other local history books or authors can you recommend?
Um, I'll say one is a book that was written about the Alexandria Library sit-in 1939, called Public in Name Only by Brenda Mitchell Powell. And that's about, a group of, it was organized by Samuel Tucker, and maybe you recognize the name. There's now a public school in Alexandria named after him. He was a young, like 26-year-old, lawyer, one of the few Black lawyers, certainly in Virginia. And he organized a group to, this is like 20 years before like the, lunch counter and other sit-ins, of doing a sit-in at the newly constructed Alexandria Public Library. So that was a good one. Um, let's see, what else is kind of coming to mind? A guy named Ted Pulliam just wrote a book about kind of tales of old Alexandria that was published with the History Press, and it's a series of articles about Alexandria. Again, I'm a little bit more Alexandria focused than Arlington. I apologize. Um, I know that there is a fellow in Arlington, maybe some of you know him, Michael Schaffner, I think his name is. Anyway, he's working on kind of U.S. colored troops that were, organized in, Arlington and District of Columbia. So that would be something to look for. I'm sure many of you knew Charlie Clark, and so he wrote obviously a lot of local history books that were really good. Um, yeah, I guess that's what kind of comes off.
Nancy says Marty, how do you say this? Suydam? I'm not sure how to pronounce the name. Suydam.
Sudam.
Sudam, thank you.
And what is that book about?
He's written several. He's very much involved with Encore Learning, and he gives, classes.
Okay.
He does a lot of outdoorsy walks, and he takes in the history as he goes these walks. So he's ended up writing like the history of 4 Mile Run. He does it in stages, and you learn everything you ever really want to know
Yeah.
about 4 Mile Run, et cetera, et cetera. So his books are often seen at the Arlington Historical Society Museum for sale, or there'll be, some of the prizes that you can bid on if you go to some of the Arlington Historical Society events as the gifts or the door prizes. And he's still writing. And he actually gives classes at Encore Learning about how to write your own memoirs and how to look into your own history, kind of like what you're talking about, to write about that. So anyway.
That's neat. Yeah, it just occurred to me that there's a book by a woman named Melanie, like Chukas Bradley. I can't remember exactly. Anyway, about Theodore Roosevelt Island, formerly Mason's Island, which just has a ton of history. And I know that there's been some books about Roslyn, which we now know of as these sort of sterile office buildings, or maybe they're trying not to make it quite so sterile, but and kind of its past is sort of a body area. So
I remember a historian named Michael Miller who used to
yeah.
work at the
Oh
Office of
yeah.
Historic Alexandria, and he published.
Yeah, he has a lot of books by him.
Yeah.
Yeah, he unfortunately passed away, but yeah, he had just a ton of stuff.
Let's see, do we
Yeah.
have any other questions, folks? Oh, someone writes Garrett Peck has written a
Oh,
number
right.
of books.
Yeah, he ended up moving, by the way, to New Mexico, but he did write some good local history books I think he's doing that there now, but he definitely did some good local history. There's another guy named Michael Pope. He's also kind of on NPR. Yeah.
Mhm.
And he's done a few. So yeah, I mean, and, fortunately there's tons to write. There's tons of things and there's tons to write about. So that's kind of the call to action to, to everybody here of, find your little bit. And it's not going to necessarily be a book, but it's going to be some little piece that will be, kind of a small thing that's going to make for a much larger whole.
And you can go to George Mason and do it as your class project. That is such a cool thing to know about.
Yeah. One of the good things is that they, well, so for example, the class I'm doing right now, they have to do, I do all the reading, but they have to do a 5,000 word historiographic essay, which isn't a research paper. It's more like how historians have looked at a particular thing, which is, it's like, I don't have to do it. Because I'm just auditing it. They don't even want me to do it because they're not going to grade it.
Is that Dr. McGraw?
No, it's
Oh,
yeah, no, it's a different, yeah.
Paula, I was just going to ask, do you think that there's any aspects of history that maybe have been not discussed enough? I mean, so often, I think you mentioned a little bit earlier about women. Do you think women historically have gotten sort of short shrift in terms of what's been written about them? Is there a greater effort now to do that? I'm wondering if there's any kind of gaps in history that you'd like to talk about that need a little bit more attention and a little bit more research. What would you tell us?
Well, I mean, there's definitely been gaps. And I think the gaps are starting to fill, in the last few decades. But I mean, I think we all grew up with history being that which was done by white men.
Yep.
Christian white men for that matter. And, that gradually people started realizing, well, wait a second, the population was actually, a lot more than that. And so there's, definitely been, you know, many more when you look at students and kind of what their dissertations are about, and scholars and articles, and go to any historic site and start seeing, for example, Arlington House is a perfect example. Not just the story of Robert E. Lee, but the story of the enslaved people who lived there, and Freedmen's Village that happened afterwards. I mean, there's just people are just trying to backfill and really, but really kind of get the fuller picture, because there was a gap, and unfortunately the kind of archives, kind of perpetuated that, because that's whose papers were preserved. Um, and so, I think it's definitely moving in the right direction. I know, like when I'm working on this book right now about Alexandria, one of my sort of arguing points is that even books about the Civil War in Alexandria, were basically about, the white people in Alexandria. And so, yeah, there's a fuller story. And so, yeah, so that's just something that I think has, for a while wasn't even noticed, then has been more noticed and is being acted on.
I think the other thing too is that, at least in the whole DMV area, but also particularly in Arlington, is the diversity. I mean, we have so many different cultures now, and I think it would be interesting to learn more about how they came to settle in Arlington.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
always share the
Yeah.
story of years ago when I volunteered over at Arlington Free Clinic. I was told that there was at least 40 different languages that people spoke in this area. And so you wonder, how did these people end up settling here, and why, and where do they live, and rich cultural? Is there
Yeah.
much of that in this area?
Well, so there needs to be more, I think. That's what a lot of the oral history is trying to get at, I think, is, trying to understand, just people's stories of how they got here, what they did when they came. In Vietnamese, I have a friend named uh, Kim O'Connell, who her mother was Vietnamese, and so she's really done a lot of research into the Vietnamese community in Arlington. She does sort of walking tours and things like that.
Mhm.
And yeah, I mean, that's a good point, is that there's now, even in the last, like, say, maybe 30 years or so, so many more different, populations and cultures have come to our area. And let's capture it, because that's the history of the future, right?
Mhm.
And
And also,
some of these older people are dying off, trying to get their stories and understanding, people who, literally they are the first generation. We're sort of looking at some of our history is, generations. Oh, there's already been many generations. I mean, we're talking about first generation people who came from El Salvador, who came from Vietnam, who came from Ethiopia, and and yeah, we hopefully will be able to, you know, make that be part of our history going forward.
Right.
have you used any tools like I've found with family photos? Google, you can look and see if it can find similar photos. And I found family members scattered around the world because I posted a photo in Facebook.
Oh, yeah.
Um, I was wondering, do you have any suggestions for how people can use these new tools to find relatives and to study history in general?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is just sort of putting the word out, finding Facebook groups that might be relevant. Um, Ancestry has a kind of a group sort of chat function. Um, I mean, I sort of feel like AI is also going to really kind of push things forward.
What I was sort of driving at. Do you have
Yeah.
major?
And I am just kind of sticking my toes in the water. And, as all of us, I'm sort of like fascinated, but also like horrified, But yeah, so I have not done the thing with like a photograph, and finding if there's other photographs. But I do, I know that just kind of comparing photographs, just all that sort of thing. I mean, that's something that's like another digital tool that's really, useful.
Okay, then we have more questions. One is, have there been any books on the history of law enforcement in Arlington or Alexandria?
Um, I don't know, but I think it'll probably be easy to find out through, searching, or consulting both libraries. Actually, one person I could think of who has done a little bit about it for the sheriff's department. There's a woman named Amy Birch, who's the public information officer for the sheriff's department in Alexandria, and she's kind of a historian at heart. And so this kind of goes back to the thing about the past, informing the present. So we were on a panel together about a month or so ago, and we both wrote a chapter for another book. But anyway, she was saying that so the sheriff's office, and law enforcement in general does not have the greatest, history of particularly working with, and I don't want to say working with, but dealing with or whatever, blacks in the cities in Alexandria, and I'm sort of assuming in Arlington. And so the sheriff has wanted to like have new recruits to the sheriff's department understand the history of the sheriff's department in Alexandria. And so she's sort of put together some training, based on the history. I don't know if she's written anything. I think it might just be more, kind of verbal sort of training. So law enforcement, I mean, that's a really, rich, probably sometimes fraught topic.
Okay, and then Nancy says books by Marty Sudum include Walk 4 Mile Run and Walks with Charlie, Sniffing Arlington Ridge's History and Mystery.
Oh, that sounds cool.
Sorry?
I said that sounds cool. They both sound really good. Yeah.
Yeah. And then Nancy and Pax say some historical figures, including women, requested that their personal papers be destroyed after their deaths. I understand their privacy needs, but a lot has probably been lost.
Correct. Correct. Yes. And nothing to do about it really, except try to convince them to change their mind when they're alive. I just realized I could stop sharing my screen here. I'm sorry about that. Let's see.
Paula, one question I was just going to quickly ask was, do you worry that with AI and, you hear so much about fake news that might be a concern when it comes to writing history? I mean, people could write whatever they want, and who's going to know the difference? And I was just wondering how people who are reading historical documents know that what's being written is actually true. I mean, I assume there's a lot of footnotes and things like that, but as a historian, what do you think about that?
Well, first of all, theoretically, people could write untrue things themselves. They don't need AI to do it. But yeah, I mean, could AI spit something out, quick as a whistle and, gosh, who knows what it is, or doctor an image.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it is. Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that probably, in all fields, people are really having to, think about.
Right.
Yeah. One thing I've heard is instead of trying to prove what's false to authenticate what is true, that might be a way around it, but that's going to be sort of a work in progress.
Right. Okay. Well, it's 10:55, so we are just about out of time. Any final comments, Liz? Anything else in the chat?
Not that I can see, no.
Okay.
Well,
Well,
I love everyone's questions and comments and ideas. So that was a coffee and conversation. That was great.
well, each week, there are always lots and lots of people from Arlington Neighborhood Village, volunteers and new people that join us and ask good questions because we have good presenters. So, and you are no exception, Paula, a local historian, and thank you so much for your presentation today.
Okay.
I just want to remind folks who are still on that next week is usually, as I understand it, the last week there's some kind of health presentation. And next week is no exception. On February 28th, we'll be hearing from Dr. Benny Kim, who is a physician at Arlington, I'm sorry, Virginia Hospital Center. And he is going to be talking about cerebral aneurysms, which is a nice formal name for strokes, including he's going to talk about surgical and endovascular treatment. And Dr. Kim is well known. In fact, he was voted as the top doctor by his peers in both Washingtonian and Northern Virginia magazine several times. So it's going to be a real honor to have him be the presenter next week on Coffee and Conversation. So be sure and join us at next week at 10 o'clock and learn about stroke. Certainly something that we all have to be aware of as we get older, both for ourselves as well as our family members. So with that, I guess we'll say goodbye and see you next week.
Paula.
And thanks again, Paula.